This is a run through of my slides for Pubcon Las Vegas 2019, and I hope you like it. So I started back in the late 90s. I ran a new and used computer and software store and found myself with over 4,000 software titles that I needed to get rid of beyond the neighborhood. Today I work with both clients and agencies as their kind of in-house go-to for SEO issues. Also, just this week, I was nominated for the Professional Who's Who, so I got that going for me. And I know it's legit because it came from Shoot Pro, who, as we all know, is the leader in Who's Who. So why this topic? Well, last year, sitting at the last session of Pubcon, one of the questions was, what's the worst thing happening now in our industry? And I tweeted this. Nobody answered this, but I said that I'd have answered that businesses were getting raked by bad actors in our industry. I'm constantly coming in behind other SEOs, other agencies, and having to either clean things up or break the bad news to clients that things are really screwed up. And so that was my pitch, and here I am. You know, back early in the day, I used to be really proud to say I did search engine optimization. It had a certain mystique. It was something that nobody knew anything about. Now, my dentist was trying to give me some SEO tips just about 2 weeks ago. Just amazing how many people know about it. People's reactions to what I do have really changed over the years. People are a lot less impressed and they're a lot more skeptical. They kind of look at me like I'm trying to sell them a clunker of used car or timeshares on the beach in Mexico, if we're talking about what I do. Now, I prefer to say I'm a web developer. That can lead to other conversations, but it has less of a yucky feel to it than even digital marketing, at least to me. So I don't know if there's anybody here, and this is just my opinion. In fact, a lot of what's in here is just my opinion. But our industry seems to have fallen in love with robocalls. Personally, I hate them. I can't believe they can't find a way to stop them. When I was a kid, my grandmother used to have a recorded message on her phone. If you would call her, it would say, "If you're not a telemarketer, press 1." You know, I don't know why they can't do it to cell phones, but if you're using robocalls to market your agency businesses, I just think you need to stop. Also, if you do get through, I can't count the number of businesses who've called me and given me the runaround, saying that they're calling about my Google listing or saying they work with Google. I mean, who doesn't work with Google that's in this room, right? I think this is intentional misleading right off the bat. And if this is a practice that you're engaging in, it just needs to stop. You know, I realize I'm not trying to cast a bad light on everybody. There are the vast majority of agencies are doing some amazing work, but I do think we all have a responsibility that extends past just getting the signature on the contract, and that's what I wanted to talk about today. So I'm going to start with Google AdWords. When it comes to Google AdWords, you know, I know a lot of agencies. I've seen a lot of clients that in the past are just getting reports from their agencies. They don't know the first thing about what's going on in their ad account. Granted, many don't want to, but they don't even have access. And I just think that's wrong. They should own the account. They should be the ones paying the bills. You know, there are agencies who run all of their clients' ads under their own account. They pay for it with their own credit cards. One agency I consult with actually preferred to do it this way. He said, because I get a ton of miles. Well, that same guy, their agency got hit by the Washington State Department of Revenue. He got hit with state income tax on over $400,000 in what was Google ad spending that he got reimbursed for the spending by his clients, but he went to arbitration, and the arbitrator said that was income, so he had to pay income tax, unplanned income tax on that $400,000 in revenue. Don't put yourself in that position. Make sure that the client owns their own Google Analytics account and you have access through your MCC. You know, a lot of agencies like to use lead pages, which are just great, by the way. I'm not saying anything bad about it, but really make it clear to your clients that if you're using a separate site like that, or if you're using a separate domain, make sure that they understand that those are your property, not theirs, and that they aren't going to be able to run this. If you're doing it through their own account, the reason I say this, I had a client who turned back on his Google ads after leaving an agency, never bothering to check if the lead pages were up, and Google never notified him that the pages were bad. I don't know if they were, I don't remember checking if they returned a 404 or not, but the ads were going nowhere. The ads weren't going to his site. He wasn't getting any phone calls. He spent a lot of money on ads that went nowhere because he didn't realize that those were the property of the agency. So just give that full disclosure. Make sure the client understands. I know this is a kind of a touchy situation. I've talked to people who have no problem managing 10 dentists in the same city. They're happy to do it. They'll run their ads till they're blue in the face. I personally think it's a conflict of interest. But if you choose to do that, make sure that you give full disclosure to your clients. Your client may not be happy that you're managing their competitor. I personally would never be happy managing two competing businesses in the same geographic location or even nationally. I think it's just a wrong to do. And so, again, that's my opinion. Here's another one that a lot of people disagree with. Using a pricing model that's a percentage of what they spend, I don't understand how that can not be a conflict of interest. Back when I sold health insurance, quite often what was best for me was not always the best for the client, and that led to some, believe me, that led to some sleepless nights and moral dilemma. I mean, I had to feed my family, I had to do what's right for me, but on the other hand, it just felt wrong, and I don't believe that convincing a client to spend more money when it also is going to benefit you, I just don't think that's an ethical thing to do. Lastly, on AdWords, we all know there's an account changes log. It shows what you do every day, every change, it logs it. I've yet to run into a client that even knew this existed. And that's one of the first things I show clients if I start working on them and I'm supposedly going to go in and be changing their ads. I always point out that you can see what's being done in your ad. Now, they may not understand it, they may not grasp it, it may need to lead to unwanted conversations, but it's the right thing to do. You can't just sit there and not log in for weeks and weeks and hope that they never discover this by looking at that account changes log. So let's jump over to Google Analytics. First off, the client should own their own Google Analytics account, and numerous times I've seen that not to be the case. This is an agency in Oregon that started creating their own Google Analytics accounts and then granting the clients access to those accounts. I subsequently took over one of the clients years later, and I noticed that their analytics code was 51. Funny enough, when I was granted access, they granted me access to all the accounts so I can actually see all the properties of that agency. And to this day, they have a ton of them in there that they don't own. Well, I've also started working with other agencies to help them transition some of these old accounts into the user's own account. And Google actually has a way now that you can move a property from one account to the other. If your agency owns the Google Analytics accounts, I think it's your responsibility to take that unprofitable and time-consuming step of helping the business owners get control of their own analytics. I've also seen agencies start brand new analytics accounts. They'll even tell the client, "Well, start a new analytics account so it's nice and clean." I don't understand that. What's the point in that? Are they just being lazy? Do they not want them to be able to easily compare this year over last year and all the way history? One of my clients now has had a site since 1999. He's had Google Analytics on for 8-9 years. And we just passed the point where he's got more than a year of history. Very, very frustrating. Obviously, it goes sight unsaid. Anything that you're setting up for tracking like this, not only should they own it, not only should they have access, they should own it. Of course, they should have access. But they should also have full admin access too, in case they need to add other users or they want to add other users. Don't just give them the read only. It sort of implies that you don't trust them. If they don't have that full access, then it's your job to make sure that someone in their organization has it. This is downright cheating, sleazy, should be illegal. I had a client that told me they worked with an agency for a month, and when they left that agency, their traffic went down by a lot. So looking into their stats, I can see way back then, as soon as they began with the agency, that agency started sending them, and I could see that under audience and technology network. I could see that they were sending them about 400 visits per day to their site. This was a very small business. It really stood out in their analytics. I don't understand what the point was of that. It's just an awful thing to do, and I don't understand why you would. I'm sure none of you would here. Bounce rates, there's a lot of conflicting information out there. I've seen articles and people claiming that high bounce rate is a ranking factor, or having a good bounce rate is a good ranking factor. Well, that's just not true. But that doesn't mean that high bounce rates are a good thing. A high bounce rate is when someone goes to your site and leaves immediately. Well, in a lot of cases, there are legitimate events that take place. If somebody goes to your site and they fill out a form that's right there on the page and then they leave, well, that certainly shouldn't count as a bounce. If they sign up for a newsletter, perhaps even if they view your video, those are legitimate events. And analytics can be set up to track events so that your bounce rate, so that they count against your bounce rate, so that you're not having a high bounce rate. Well, there are also something called non-interaction events that can be set up, and those were really designed for like a single-page website, that kind of endless scroll website. And frankly, some of those events can be pretty ridiculous. I mean, you can set up a 2 seconds time spent on a page to be an event that would artificially lower your bounce rate. Even a page view can be set up as an event. And so I've gone in and cleaned those up before on analytics accounts, and then had people say, well, our bounce rate is going high. So when I go in and I look at all the analytics events that are set up, I try to make it clear what's going on. So I want to move on to Google My Business. There are a few things that take place in Google My Business that are just unsavory. First off, a business should own their own Google My Business listing. There's a few things that are more frustrating than trying to gain ownership by a business that was claimed by some guy at gmail.com when that's your client. And the real client, legitimate client, and we do Camtasia sessions. I actually go through the process with them if they don't already have it claimed. Nothing's more frustrating than them not being able to reach or even know who has claimed their Google My Business listing. Once they have their own listing, you should get granted access through an agency account. Google has the ability to register your agency with Google My Business. You don't have to be a Google partner for this. All you have to do is have a Google account that's associated with your company's domain and doesn't own or manage any locations. So in a lot of cases, you'll just need to create a new email address, and that's how you set up your agency with Google, and that's how you should get access to people's GMB accounts. Keyword stuffing the business name works so well for ranking, but it's spam. You run the danger of getting the client's business suspended. You know, it's very tempting. You want to bring them results. You edit their business name to include some keywords. That can lead to real problems. If you're going to do that, first off, of course, full disclosure, tell the client what's going on, explain the risks, but more important, encourage the client to file with their Secretary of State and get a DBA, a doing business as name. That way, Jim Smith, accident attorney in Milwaukee, can be the actual business name, so that they have some recourse. If you change that and they start ranking and then Google changes it back, you have some recourse with Google to be able to prove that, hey, that is my actual business name. A DBA, I don't know about all the states, but in Oregon it's only $50 a year, and it can be well worth it for improving business. There are some great businesses out there that encourage review participation from customers, and I'm not casting any aspersions on those. However, there are also businesses out there that'll call you and they'll tell you that they will get you reviews, and they can, and they will, and they do, and they can hurt. Your reviews should actually come from real customers. I would think that would go site on. I would think that wouldn't be necessary to mention, but seemingly it is. Fake reviews are bad. So finally, let's talk about your website, your client's website. Has anyone ever had a client's domain expire while they're working with them? That happened to me in the past. It's really frustrating, really embarrassing. Sure, I didn't think at the time that was my job, but I really think it is, and it should be our problem. As their representative, you should make sure that they understand who the domain registrar is. I always look up every client right from the get-go, and I really like using domain tools. I think it gives the most complete information, and I can't count the number of times I've said, hey, do you know John Jones? And they'll go, no. And I'm like, well, that's the registrant of your domain. He's the one who owns it. Now, GDPR is making it harder to get some of this information for some domains, but I really think domain tools gives you the most complete info that's available. Where it's hosted, you can also get that same information at domain tools. Make sure the client understands they are not techies. By looking at the name servers, that can tell you where it's hosted. Make sure your client understands where that is, and frankly, I've worked with agencies where the people I'm working with don't understand that stuff either. That is our job, regardless of what you think. I think that's our job. This is kind of interesting. The website. Did you know that copyright law states that the creator of the website's design and content automatically becomes the owner of the website, of those assets? I didn't know that either. Here's the link to the copyright information. You own, if it's your website, you own the text that you provide, and you own the pictures you take. That's it. I had a client who left an agency who had developed his site, and they wouldn't give him access. They wouldn't give him access. They wouldn't give him the site on a backup or anything. He actually went to a lawyer to try and get it, and the lawyer's the one who ended up telling him, sorry, you're out of luck. Of course, we had our ways. We were able to get the whole website, and nothing ever came of that. But still, if you're doing web development, web design, I think it's upon you to make it clear to the client that they are going to own the property when you're done. Lastly, granting client access. The client should have access to their own website. Not only should they know where it's hosted and all that stuff, but they should be able to make changes if they want to. Even if they don't want to, I like to give people a login just in the case of emergencies. It just doesn't seem right to me to lock somebody out of their own website. If you're an agency that flat out doesn't allow them to have access to their own site, well, shame on you. There's a telephone company in Washington that was recently. There's a telephone company in Washington. They did telephone books. They have an agency arm that kind of took over all their businesses. Well, I'm working with an agency on a consulting basis that has had to deal with this agency that gives users, they won't give users an admin access to their WordPress. They won't let them have full access to everything. They're really being stingy with it. They're making things really difficult, and that's just a really weaselly thing to do. The ability to back up and restore your website in an emergency is something that I think should be a part of our job, or at the very least, make sure that the client knows whose job it is and who to contact if something goes wrong. While you may not be personally responsible, you're going to have egg on your face if you find out their site's down and been down and you're running ads for them and you don't know how to do anything about it. It's important that you can at least ask them the question, do they know how to back up and restore? And it's a revenue opportunity for your agency too to get involved in that. You know, adding content just for the sake of content, it's a very easy thing to sell to a client. You tell them content is king. It's easy to deliver for agencies. But does anyone remember Panda? I have to say that a lot of the content I see is just adding to web pollution. You're going to be much better off doing less content that's of higher quality, something well researched, thoughtful, promoting it well. I know it's an easy revenue generator. You can get the content and mark it up, but look at analytics. Are people really coming and looking at that content? Is it actually becoming, are your new blog posts that are going up on an incredible basis actually becoming landing pages? In many cases, they're not. There are some agencies that specialize in certain niches that like to sell expensive websites, and they'll just simply reuse the content for multiple clients. This is an example of a snippet I took off of a client that I retained. I was looking at his content, I did a snippet search, and sure enough, a snippet from one page was on 256 other websites. This was a really expensive website that he had bought. He was in the medical space, and interestingly enough, that site was sold to him by a Google partner. You know, I can attest to the fact that comment spam, commenting on blogs, used to work for ranking in the old days. If you think it still does, you're wrong. Don't do it anymore. It's nothing but annoying, and it's really not a service you should be getting paid for, much less doing. Interlinking clients. I've always admired web developers who have what I would call a CBN, a client blog network, where they get all these links to them because they have that footer link. Well, some agencies take it a step further, and they turn things into they turn their clients into actual blog networks, all interlinking with each other. This is an example of 243 different clients. This is actually the same Google partner that sold that duplicate content to my client. And then this is another one completely different. Coincidentally, it's just medical stuff at the top, but they do a lot of dentists, they do insurance companies, all kinds of stuff. 466 linked clients in their network. That's a link scheme. Also, they claim to be a Google partner. They're proud to be a Google partner, and that kind of thing. It's just not okay. And by the way, I've a couple years ago I wrote a blog post about this. I outed the company. I was frustrated because I actually lost a client over this to that company. I told Gary about it from Google. I sent him an email and the information. Of course, nothing ever happened. None of the clients ever got notifications of unnatural links or anything like that. It was pretty frustrating. Just because it works to rent PBN links doesn't mean that it's the right thing to do. If you have an honest discussion with your client and you explain that, well, we can get you some rankings, but there's a risk, and you explain the risk of possible penalty, perhaps you even sell that by saying, and it's not that hard to get out of the penalty. It usually doesn't last anymore. It's not like the old days where you were penalized for a year or more with Penguin. If that's a service that you have, if that's a service that you offer, and you've got your own PBNs, more power to you. But just give full disclosure to your client. Let them know the risks. Let them make the decision. Don't just take it upon yourself to do it for them, and have them ultimately get frustrated and get in trouble. The last thing I want to mention here is new site migrations. The one thing that comes to mind is, oh my God, how is it that, Google, best practices for new websites, best practices for site migrations. Quick story, there's a major microbrewery that I know of that ultimately became a client. They spent almost $130,000 on their website. It was a WordPress website, if that's not startling enough. I discovered almost a year after they had their site built that their site was both. It still had no index, so of course the pages weren't in the index, but the old URLs that were still in the index were never 301. So they left the development no index on the site. They never 301 the old pages. After taking it down, they didn't move hosts. They actually deleted all the old pages, and they got $130,000 for the job. I felt that should be legally actionable, and I explained to the client that I'd be willing to testify if they wanted to sue. But the agency that had built it, somehow they went out of business after selling $130,000 websites. I don't know how you go out of business, but excuse me, but they were gone. Anyway, these are some of the links that I talked about in here. Those are all on the last slide, and here's where you can actually download these slides for yourself. Thanks, and I hope you have an optimal day.